You put in the effort. You show up for the rehab therapy session or you push through the workout and you do exactly what you are supposed to do. But instead of feeling stronger, you feel completely drained for the rest of the day. I've experienced this myself, especially after intense trail runs, and I see the same pattern in high-performing individuals as well as in inpatient rehabilitation with stroke and other patients. The fatigue that sets in afterward doesn't match the effort, and sometimes it carries into the next day. Most people assume they are out of shape or that they simply need to push harder. But you don't look at the exercise. You look at the exact moment the exercise stops. Today, I want to show you an underused metric that reflects your biological resilience, because without it, your gains plateau and you feel like you're constantly hitting a wall. I see this pattern across completely different populations. In inpatient rehab, a stroke or post-surgical patient completes a short walking session. Their heart rate rises modestly, but afterward, it stays elevated. The system remains activated long after the movement stops. In high-functioning individuals, someone finishes a run or a lift. Performance looks fine, but later they crash. Energy drops. Focus fades. I get it, because I have to deal with it. When your system is tapped out, even the thought of movement is draining. You hit a wall of internal resistance just thinking about effort. So how do you know if you are actually building endurance or just accumulating fatigue? There's a very simple way to do this. It takes 1 minute. Here is exactly how you test it. At the end of your activity, stop completely. No walking, no pacing. Check your heart rate the moment you stop. This is your peak heart rate. Next, relax for 60 seconds. No talking, no scrolling. At the 1 minute mark, check your pulse again. Subtract this second number from your peak heart rate. The difference between those two numbers is your heart rate recovery. It gives us profound insight into the state of your nervous system and can even help predict future heart issues. But before we explain how it works, let's look at what your specific number actually means. While there is individual variability, the clinical standard is clear. When resting in a seated or standing position, we are looking for a drop of at least 12 beats in that first minute. If your heart rate drops by less than 12 beats, that is a clinical red flag. Here is why. When you stop exercising, your heart rate doesn't just settle back to normal on its own. Your vagus nerve has to actively step on the brake. In the first 60 seconds after you stop moving, your parasympathetic nervous system through your vagus nerve releases acetylcholine to soothe the heart rate down. But if your nervous system is exhausted, it cannot produce that chemical brake efficiently. Think of heart rate recovery as a measurement of that vagal brake. A faster heart rate recovery means your system transitions efficiently. If your heart rate dropped by 30 beats or more in that first minute, your system is highly resilient. But what if your heart rate recovery is sitting at 10 or 12? That signals a nervous system locked in stress. But you must realize that this number isn't just about your fitness, and it isn't just about your heart. To understand the significance of this, think of your mind and body as a car. Now let's see what is happening under the hood. Think of driving your car on the highway using cruise control. When you hit a steep hill, the car must shift gears to adapt to the incline. Your autonomic nervous system does the exact same thing, constantly shifting states to adapt to your environment. During activity, your system shifts into a sympathetic dominant state, like putting your car in sport mode. Heart rate rises, blood pressure increases. This output is driven by muscle feedback and a flood of circulating stress hormones, like noradrenaline. When the activity stops, your body needs to instantly shift from sport mode to eco mode. In that critical first 60 seconds, the dominant driver is parasympathetic reactivation. The vagus nerve acts as the brake pedal, releasing acetylcholine, which acts directly on the sinoatrial node of the heart, slowing it down. After that, recovery depends more on sympathetic withdrawal, metabolite clearance, and normalization of circulation. So heart rate recovery is not just a vagal number. It reflects how quickly the entire system transitions from output to recovery. But if you are in a state of chronic neurofatigue, your sympathetic gas pedal is stuck, and your vagal brake is physically too weak to overpower it. The result is a low heart rate recovery. But this doesn't just affect your heart rate, it destabilizes your baroreflex. The baroreflex is the system that regulates your blood pressure beat by beat. When you start or stop activity, blood flow shifts, pressure changes. In a healthy nervous system, the baroreflex instantly senses this and recalibrates your heart rate and vascular tone. But when the system is fatigued or dysregulated, that coordination breaks down, the heart stays elevated, blood pressure becomes unstable, and the brain receives inconsistent flow. That is when you feel lightheaded, drained, or cognitively off after activity. The biggest mistake I see in both inpatient rehab and high-performance training is how people respond to this exact failure. Instead of fixing the brake, they drive around in sport mode with their foot jammed on the accelerator. This doesn't build resilience. It actively wears your mind and body down. The problem occurs because all of our focus is on the work. More reps, more distance, more intensity. When heart rate recovery is slow, most people say low vagal tone, but that's incomplete. What it often means is that the system cannot disengage. The vagus nerve is not reactivating quickly enough. But just as importantly, the sympathetic system is not shutting off. And that can happen for several reasons. Deconditioning makes things seem harder, and neurological conditions can disrupt central autonomic control. Take Sarah. After a mild stroke, she was in the inpatient unit doing therapy. Her grit was remarkable, but she was pushing an exhausted system. With a heart rate recovery of only 10, seemingly low-intensity therapy sessions were actively traumatizing her nervous system. She experienced deep fatigue, orthostatic hypotension, and her resting muscle spasticity actually got worse. However, with the right strategy, she made quicker progress. But then I see the exact same mistake in the high-performing individual. Once discharged, Sarah was determined to get back to her former physical self. But after intense workouts, she started waking up with that heavy lead blanket exhaustion. Thinking she was just low on energy, she reached for caffeine and pre-workout supplements. But stimulants do not solve an autonomic failure. While her heart rate recovery was slightly better at 15, it was still not strong enough to handle the load. She was stacking effort on top of incomplete recovery. What we can learn from her story is this: you cannot outwork a broken autonomic nervous system. If your recovery is low, you have to actively intervene. And that's exactly what Sarah did next, which accelerated her recovery and progress. However, you cannot simply think your way out of autonomic failure. You cannot directly command your heart rate to slow down, but you can influence the system that controls it. There is one physiological mechanism that sits perfectly at the intersection of voluntary control and autonomic regulation. Breathing. That's what you calibrate. When you deliberately slow your breathing to about 6 breaths per minute, you begin to increase vagal signaling. You reduce sympathetic drive and improve the baroreflex responsiveness. That's how you recalibrate. Try this in between sets or at the end of a therapy session. You immediately relax into a paced breathing cadence. First, take in a 4-second inhale, then a brief hold, followed by a slow 6-second exhale and another brief hold before you inhale again. The extended exhale is the critical trigger. You are actively increasing vagal signaling, soothing the sympathetic drive, and restoring your baroreflex. This is the core of the fatigue, energy, and capacity framework. You do not build true biological capacity by constantly draining your battery to zero. You build it by proving to your nervous system that it can safely recover after every single exertion. Heart rate recovery gives you a window into that process, not as a diagnosis, but as a signal. So before you push harder, ask yourself, is your system actually recovering? These are the fundamentals of human existence, recovery, and progress. For more, check out the fatigue playlist or one of the videos on the screen. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Moving Better. Remember this, energy is managed. If it's managed, it can be recalibrated. Build reserve before you add load. If this was useful, leave a comment below. Move smart. Move with intent. I'll see you in the next episode.